Bangkok, August 1996. The night was thick with humidity, pressing against the walls of Klong Prem Central Prison, a place where time itself seemed to rot. Yet, inside its maze of cells, one man moved in silence. His name was David Macmillan, a British prisoner facing the death sentence for heroin trafficking. Each step he took was deliberate, each breath measured. For months, he had studied every sound in this fortress, the creak of metal doors, the rhythm of guard patrols, the brief stillness before dawn. Tonight, he acted. The faint rasp of a hacksaw broke the silence as steel met steel. Minutes stretched like hours. Beyond those bars waited 7 walls, razor wire, and certain death if caught. Yet Macmillan did not hesitate. Disguised beneath a borrowed umbrella, he crossed the final gate as if he belonged to the night itself. By morning, his cell lay empty, and history would remember him as the only Westerner to escape Thailand's most notorious prison. David Macmillan was born on April 9, 1956, in London, into a world of comfort and culture. His father, John Macmillan, was a respected television executive at Associated Rediffusion, one of Britain's pioneering networks. His mother, Australian by birth, came from a refined and educated background. After their separation, David moved with her and his sister to Australia, a country that offered him both stability and freedom. At Caulfield Grammar School in Melbourne, Macmillan's path appeared predictable. The environment was disciplined, academic, and designed to produce success. Yet, even in those early years, he showed a restlessness that privilege couldn't calm. Rules felt negotiable. Boundaries seemed like challenges. Behind the polished image of a private school student, curiosity was already steering him toward risk. Drawn to the power of images and storytelling, Macmillan began working as a cinema projectionist and camera operator. Through this, he entered a creative circle filled with free thinkers, activists, and outsiders, people who questioned systems rather than followed them. He absorbed their energy, their defiance, their fascination with life on the edge. Later, he found a place in advertising, where intelligence and persuasion were currency, but discipline was never his strength. Macmillan's talent thrived on instability, on testing how far he could go without falling. His life, even then, carried the marks of a man intrigued by control, risk, and illusion. His story was never one of hardship or survival. It was not driven by hunger or desperation. It began with opportunity and a young man too curious to stay within its limits. By the late 1970s, Sydney had become a city of contradictions. Glittering nightlife and cultural freedom masked a growing appetite for drugs that flowed in from Asia. Amid that restless energy, David Macmillan moved easily between worlds, from the projection booths of suburban cinemas to the smoky backrooms where deals were whispered more often than filmed. His work in film had drawn him close to people living on the edges of legality, safecrackers, political radicals, and streetwise dealers. Many of them were part of a loose movement campaigning for marijuana reform, idealists who believed prohibition was hypocrisy. Macmillan, ever observant, joined their cause not out of conviction but curiosity. He began distributing The Australasian Weed, a small magazine that mixed activism with underground opportunity. What began as advocacy soon revealed a different network, one that traded not just ideas but routes, currencies, and contacts. It was through these circles that Macmillan discovered the architecture of international smuggling. He studied the patterns of customs officers, the timing of flights, and the inconsistencies in baggage systems. His intellect became his weapon. Where others relied on violence, he relied on precision. By duplicating baggage claim tags and pairing them with false identities, he built a method to move hashish from India to Australia without ever being seen carrying it. Each success confirmed what he had begun to suspect, that his true addiction wasn't to drugs, but to control. Macmillan saw crime not as rebellion, but as design, a system to be mastered. The same curiosity that once led him to cameras and storytelling now guided him through the mechanics of deception. He had crossed a line quietly, almost elegantly, a man testing the limits of how far intelligence could bend the law before it broke him. By the early 1980s, David Macmillan had become a man without borders. London, Brussels, Bangkok, Melbourne, each city served as a different face of the same illusion. To those who met him, he was a filmmaker, a businessman, or an eccentric traveller. In truth, he was operating under more than 30 false identities, moving through airports with the ease of a diplomat and the precision of a spy. His world was built on deception, but it looked like success. Imported European cars lined the driveways of his Australian properties. Luxury apartments were paid for in cash. His nights were spent in champagne-soaked gatherings where money seemed infinite and danger felt distant. Macmillan's charm made him both invisible and unforgettable, the kind of man who could disappear in plain sight. His partnership with Michael Sullivan expanded the operation beyond imagination. Together with their companions, Clelia Vigano and Mary Castillo, they built an intricate system of couriers, code words, and hidden routes stretching from India to the United Kingdom. Macmillan coordinated shipments like a producer planning a film, every movement rehearsed, every player expendable. But power attracted attention. Among his associates was Lord Tony Moynihan, a disgraced British peer turned opportunist. Their brief alliance collapsed after a scheme in Manila, where a supposed cockfight investment turned into a con. Macmillan walked away wiser, colder, and permanently distrustful. The illusion of fraternity had vanished. As his empire grew, so did his arrogance. He flaunted wealth that could not be explained, spending with the confidence of a man convinced he was untouchable. Yet behind that glamour, investigators were closing in. The Australian authorities began tracing assets worth millions, hidden companies, offshore accounts, unregistered properties. For Macmillan, the empire that once symbolized freedom was now a cage of his own design. What began as strategy had turned into spectacle. And beneath the luxury and lies, the first cracks of downfall had already started to form. In January 1982, a task force known as Operation Aries marked the beginning of David Macmillan's reckoning. It was a multi-million-dollar collaboration between Australian police, customs authorities, and the US Drug Enforcement Administration. After years of surveillance, coded intercepts, and quiet observation, they closed in on Macmillan, Michael Sullivan, Clelia Vigano, and Mary Castillo. The charge was grave: conspiracy to import heroin on an international scale. Macmillan had built an operation that stretched across continents, using false identities and encrypted communication long before the digital age. To the public, it was one of the most sophisticated smuggling networks ever uncovered in Australia, but inside the courtroom, the spectacle turned personal. Cameras flashed. Newspapers branded him a drug baron. Associates who once shared champagne now whispered his name to prosecutors, turning informants in exchange for freedom. Beneath the surface of the trial ran a darker subplot, an alleged plan to escape custody by helicopter with assistance from former SAS operatives. It never materialized, but its rumor deepened his reputation as both audacious and unbreakable. Yet, behind that image, the cost was already unbearable. Clelia Vigano and Mary Castillo, his closest companions and heroin users, could not withstand the collapse. In 1985, both women perished in a fire at Melbourne's Fairlair Women's Prison. Their deaths burned into Macmillan's conscience as the true consequence of his ambition. For all his planning and control, he could not save the people drawn into his orbit. When the final verdict arrived, Macmillan was convicted on one count and sentenced to 17 years in prison. The empire was gone, the money vanished, and the illusion of mastery shattered. But inside the system he once outsmarted, he studied its mechanics like an architect trapped in his own design. By the time he walked out on parole in 1993, Macmillan understood not only crime, but the machinery that sustained it. By the mid-1990s, Macmillan was once again moving under false names. This time, he called himself Daniel Westlake, a man with no past and no record. He had already served time, lost his partners, and seen the system from the inside. Yet, the need for control, or perhaps revenge, pulled him back into the shadows. Thailand was his next stop, a place where money could buy silence and opportunity, but never safety. His arrest came in Bangkok's Chinatown, sudden, calculated and final. The Thai authorities, tipped off and waiting, seized him for heroin trafficking. Within hours, the former British smuggler was swallowed by Klong Prem Central Prison, a concrete labyrinth built for punishment, not redemption. Inside, nearly 20,000 inmates fought for air, space and survival. The heat was unbearable, the stench constant. Every corridor echoed with the sound of chains and the shuffle of barefoot prisoners. Yet, Macmillan's foreign status and hidden cash earned him small luxuries. Guards could be persuaded. He had access to books, a small radio, and food beyond the watery rice others lived on. But comfort meant nothing against the reality that surrounded him. Klong Prem was a waiting room for the condemned. Beyond its walls loomed Bang Kwang Central Prison, the Bangkok Hilton, where men waited to die by firing squad. Macmillan understood the system better than most. Money could slow time, but not stop it. Transfer to Bang Kwang meant execution. The sentence was already written. The only question left was when. That clarity changed him. The restless mind that once built international smuggling networks now turned to something simpler: survival. He began to observe everything: guard shifts, lock patterns, cell maintenance routines. He bribed for tools, a file, a blade, anything that could cut metal without sound. Notes were passed through cigarette packs, instructions encoded in meaningless lines. The plan was impossible, yet in that impossibility lay his only hope. As the final night arrived, Klong Prem seemed quieter than usual. Even the air felt heavier. In his cell, Macmillan prepared for the one act that could define or end his life. No drama, no speeches, just the steady rhythm of a man facing death and choosing to defy it. By dawn, he would no longer be a prisoner awaiting execution. He would be a ghost, vanishing into the chaos of Bangkok. Midnight, August 1996. The prison lay under a heavy, sleepless silence. Inside Klong Prem, one man prepared to do what no foreigner had ever done before: escape from Thailand's most fortified prison. For months, David Macmillan had studied every detail: the shifts of guards, the sound of keys, the direction of floodlights. Now, every movement mattered. Every breath could betray him. He began with the bars. A hacksaw, hidden for weeks, met steel with a muted scrape. Each stroke was deliberate. Each pause timed with distant footsteps. Sweat mixed with rust, but the rhythm never broke. One section at a time, the barrier gave way. Then came the walls, 7 of them, each more desperate than the last. He climbed, crawled, and cut through, using makeshift ladders and bribed silence to stay invisible. Outside, the air was damp, thick with the city's midnight heat. Razor wire tore at his clothes as he moved. A dog barked somewhere behind him. He froze. Torchlight swept close, then past. His heart didn't race. It slowed. Years of imprisonment had taught him that panic kills. Calm saves. To blend in, he carried an umbrella, a small, ordinary thing that made him look like every other shadow moving through the Bangkok night. Beyond the final gate, the road stretched open. He walked, not ran. Every step took him further from the sentence of death. By dawn, Macmillan had vanished into the chaos of the city. Hours later, at Don Muang Airport, a man named Daniel Westlake appeared, clean-shaven, composed, holding a forged passport. At the departure gate to Singapore, he moved with quiet precision, his voice steady as he handed over the papers. The officer barely looked up. As the airplane door sealed shut, the sound marked more than takeoff. It marked the end of captivity. Later, Macmillan would describe it as the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. For him, freedom wasn't a celebration. It was silence. The silence of a man who had defied an entire system and walked out alive. He left behind a cell, a name, and a myth that no one in Klong Prem could believe until the morning came and his bed was found empty. When David Macmillan fled Thailand, freedom was not redemption, it was exile. His escape from Bangkok led him into the harsh terrain of Baluchistan, Pakistan, a landscape defined by lawless borders and quiet power. Here, protection came not from institutions, but from influence. Macmillan found refuge under the wing of Mir Nur Jahan Margsi, a tribal figure whose reach extended beyond law, deep into the machinery of political control. In Pakistan, survival depended less on identity and more on allegiance. Under Margsi's protection, Macmillan resumed his trade, this time building routes from Karachi to Scandinavia. The old habits returned with precision. He organized couriers, secured air passages, and moved product through fractured networks that thrived on corruption and mutual silence. The system was both fragile and unbreakable, built on cash, fear, and convenience. Pakistan in the 1990s offered a paradoxical safety. It punished publicly, yet permitted privately. Macmillan, once the hunted man of Thailand, now lived among traffickers, officers, and bureaucrats who all played the same quiet game. But no system built on deceit holds forever. One courier, cornered, desperate, and talkative, broke the code. Under interrogation, he revealed the route, the cargo, and the foreigner behind it all. Macmillan's name surfaced once again, this time in Lahore. He was arrested and brought before customs officials who understood what his capture meant: leverage. The exchange was not moral, it was financial. The more he paid, the less he suffered. Transferred to Karachi Central Jail, Macmillan entered another world, one that operated on hierarchy and bribes. Money replaced law, food, cigarettes, privacy, even respect. Everything could be bought. He adapted quickly, maintaining privileges that insulated him from the worst of the prison's brutality. Yet corruption was a double-edged weapon. The same power that protected him could destroy him at a moment's notice. The collapse came through something trivial, a dispute over a contraband phone. It was an object of control, a link to the outside world. When authority turned against him, Macmillan was stripped of comfort and sent to Hyderabad jail. If Karachi was a market, Hyderabad was a dungeon. The conditions were medieval: damp walls, scarce light, and the constant presence of disease. For the first time since his escape, Macmillan faced the full consequence of his own choices. His salvation came from the same source as his survival: influence. Lord Margsi intervened, exerting pressure that reached beyond cells and chains. The decision was not about justice, it was about balance. When power speaks in silence, men like Macmillan live or die depending on its convenience. Within weeks, the pressure shifted his fate again. He was released from Hyderabad and in a matter of months acquitted by a customs court. The Thai authorities, perhaps fatigued by bureaucracy or uninterested in reopening old wounds, never pursued extradition. Macmillan's freedom, this time, was not earned but allowed. He left Pakistan quietly with no noise, no celebration. The escape that had once defined his legend now ended in solitude. By the time he crossed the border, Macmillan understood what survival had cost. Every escape had stripped away another layer of illusion. The thrill was gone. What remained was endurance. Pakistan had given him protection, profit, and power, but none of it felt like freedom. In the end, he was a man moving through systems built on compromise, still searching for a version of control that reality would never grant him. By the late 1990s, David Macmillan had seen more borders, prisons, and escapes than most men could imagine. Yet somehow, he returned to the one place that had once defined his beginning: London. After years of chaos across continents, he came back in 1999, living quietly under his real name, as if the past could be erased by familiarity. But time doesn't forgive repetition. Macmillan was not a man running from danger anymore. He was running from himself. In 2002, at Heathrow Airport, the pattern caught up with him again. Authorities intercepted a package carrying 0.5 kilogram of Class A drugs, a small fraction of the empire he once commanded, but enough to destroy what was left of his freedom. The arrest felt almost inevitable. The man who had outsmarted Thai guards, Pakistani customs, and countless police units around the world was undone by his own persistence. This time, there was no grand escape, no hidden passage or powerful friend to intervene. He served 2 years in prison, a quieter sentence, but one that revealed a deeper truth. The man who once defied death couldn't escape habit. For most, that might have been a turning point. For Macmillan, it became another pause before the cycle began again. In 2012, he reappeared in headlines after British authorities uncovered a sting operation involving a heroin shipment mailed from Pakistan. His name surfaced once more, surrounded by whispers of networks and coded exchanges. The operation was messy, not the work of a mastermind, but of a man chasing a ghost of former glory. Despite inconsistencies in the evidence, the court saw enough to convict. At Croydon Crown Court, Macmillan was sentenced to 6 years. The world had changed. The trade was digital now, surveillance sharper, corruption less predictable. Yet Macmillan seemed unchanged. He faced the verdict with the same composure that had once carried him through interrogations and prisons on 3 continents. When he was released in 2014, he was older, slower, and diminished, but not transformed. The defiance remained, though stripped of energy. His story had circled back to where it began, a man of intelligence trapped in his own repetition. Every time he escaped, life rebuilt the cage differently. Macmillan's return to London was not a comeback, but a conclusion. The irony was complete. He had escaped one of the world's most brutal prisons, evaded death sentences, and survived systems designed to crush men, yet he couldn't outrun himself. His life had become its own prison, one built from memory, habit, and inevitability. In the end, freedom was never about borders or locks. For Macmillan, it was about the one thing he could never control, the cycle that kept him chasing the illusion of escape. Each arrest, each release, each return only proved what his story had always been about. Every escape is temporary, and every freedom is conditional. In November 2014, David Macmillan faced what would become his final confrontation with the law, a battle that felt less like a trial and more like a reckoning. Thailand, the nation he had once escaped from in a handmade ladder and stolen uniform, now demanded his return. The request reopened the story that had followed him for decades. London police arrested him, and once again, Macmillan found himself behind bars, this time in Wandsworth Prison, awaiting a decision that could send him back to the place he had risked everything to flee. The case moved to Westminster Magistrates Court, where defence barrister Tim Owen QC built his argument around human rights. Owen described Thai prisons not as correctional facilities, but as instruments of torment, places where disease, abuse, and torture were part of daily existence. Macmillan's defence was not built on innocence, but on survival. It wasn't a question of guilt, but of whether returning him to Thailand would violate the basic principles of humanity. The court, along with the Home Secretary, ruled against him. Extradition was approved. For Macmillan, the verdict felt inevitable. The system had finally closed the circle. Yet, just as the process neared completion, Thailand unexpectedly withdrew its request. No explanation, no political statement, no closure. In September 2016, Macmillan walked out of prison again, not acquitted, not exonerated, simply released. It was a victory that carried no joy. What should have felt like freedom instead felt like erasure. His story had reached its final paradox. The man who had escaped everything now survived only because the world had stopped caring. Victory without celebration, survival without redemption. The story ended not with defiance, but with silence. From childhood, David Macmillan seemed destined for the spotlight. Long before his name filled police files, it appeared on television credits. As a young news presenter, he embodied poise, intelligence, and discipline, traits that would later define both his brilliance and his downfall. Decades later, those same qualities re-emerged in another form. No longer behind a news desk, Macmillan faced cameras as the subject of fascination. Through books like Escape, 2008, Macmillan, 2011, and Unforgiving Destiny, 2017, he reconstructed his story, not as a criminal confession, but as a meditation on survival and consequence. Each publication blurred the line between redemption and self-mythology. The media followed. From Underbelly Files, The Man Who Got Away to Danny Dyer's Deadliest Men, Macmillan's narrative became cultural currency, half cautionary tale, half urban legend. In interviews, he balanced guilt with wit, reflection with rebellion, reshaping his legacy into something neither law nor prison could define. But behind every retelling lies contradiction. Was he a thinker destroyed by ambition, or a man resisting a system more corrupt than himself? The truth, as always with Macmillan, refuses simplicity. Calmly, the voice returns to stillness. Some men break laws, others break walls. David Macmillan broke both and lived to tell the story.